The late autumn wind drifted through the tall pines of Willow Creek Valley, carrying the cold breath of winter on its back. The trees whispered like old storytellers, their needles shivering under the first hints of frost. Clara Whitmore stood beside the weather-worn fence behind her father's ranch, her hand gripping a splintered rail as though it were the last thing keeping her anchored to the life she'd always known. In the distance, the prairie glowed beneath the dying sun, soft gold fading into a bruised red, a sky so heartbreakingly beautiful that it made her chest tighten. Because out there, beyond the sloping fields and quiet tree lines, was where she had met the man she was never supposed to love. His name was Tarek, a young Cheyenne warrior with eyes as calm as a still dawn lake and a smile warmer than any fire she had ever sat beside. They first met on a cool spring afternoon when Clara was thrown from her horse near the northern woods. She remembered the sharp pain twisting up her leg, the sinking panic as she tried to stand, and then a shadow stepping out from between the cedar trees. Tarek had approached her with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged to the wilderness more than he ever could to walls or fences. He knelt beside her without hesitation, his touch steady and sure, as he bandaged her ankle with strips torn from his own hunting sash. He carried her home before the shadows could swallow the forest, moving with a gentleness that made the world slow around them. From that moment on, Clara Whitmore was no longer the obedient daughter her town expected her to be. She was a girl who knew what it meant to feel alive, to feel seen, to feel chosen by someone the world insisted she should stay away from. But the deeper the love, the higher the price. Whispers began as soon as the townsfolk noticed Clara lingering near the old oak at the edge of the fields, the one whose thick roots curled like ancient hands. They noticed the way she carried a basket of food every few days. They noticed the way she came back flushed, eyes shining in a way no one in Willow Creek had ever caused. Word spread like brush fire. By summer's end, there were murmurs about improper meetings, about a girl being led astray, about a Whitmore acting like she'd forgotten her place. The accusations thickened with every passing week until one evening the town gathered in the meeting hall, a cramped wooden building where justice too often looked like fear wearing a coat of righteousness. Clara stood in the corner, shoulders square even as her heart hammered. She tried to speak, to explain, to defend the man who had once carried her to safety, who had shown her kindness when no one else had been there. But no one gave her the chance. Her father rose first. George Whitmore was a man who spoke rarely but loudly when he believed his family's reputation was at stake. His face was red, not just from anger, but from the terror of losing control, of being judged, of the town's disapproval pressing on him like a weight. "My daughter," he said, voice cracking in the silent room, "is no longer in her right mind. She has been influenced, seduced by a man from the Cheyenne tribe." Gasps cut the air like knives. A few women clutched their shawls closer. A few men muttered about danger, about savagery, about protecting the town's daughters. Not a single person asked Clara to speak. Not a single person wondered whether she loved Tarek, whether Tarek respected her, whether he had ever harmed her. They did not care that he had saved her life. They did not care that he had protected the valley last winter, silently driving a starving wolf pack away from their cattle. They did not care about the truth. They cared only about differences, about color, about boundaries they'd drawn long before Clara was born. By the time her father finished, the verdict had already formed in the room's stale air. Clara Whitmore would be banished from Willow Creek until she had atoned and returned to the honor expected of a white woman. That phrase echoed like a sentence handed down from some unseen judge. Clara's breath shook, but she did not cry. Tears were something she had learned to swallow the day her mother died, when she promised herself she would survive hurt by becoming harder than it. But this hurt, this was a wound she could not armor against. The council escorted her out before dawn, while frost still clung to the ground like thin glass. They gave her a small bag of clothes, a blanket, and nothing more, not even the courtesy of time to gather her mother's locket or the book of poems she kept under her pillow. The gates of Willow Creek were pulled open just wide enough for her to walk through, then slammed shut behind her with a finality that echoed in her bones. Clara turned only once. The town stood silent, windows dark, buildings stiff against the rising cold. She did not look for her father. She did not look for forgiveness. She looked at the place that had been her home, the place she had wanted to share with the man she loved. Her heart fell to the ground then, heavy, shattered, beyond repair. Tarek knew nothing of any of it. He was miles away in the eastern foothills, tracking deer through snow-dusted pines. He had carved a small bone charm to give her as well, a protective token shaped like an eagle's wing. He returned at sunset, the sky burning orange behind him as he crossed the meadow. He whistled softly, the signal they always used. No response. He approached the oak tree, found no basket waiting, no footprints in the dirt, no Clara. And in that moment, Tarek felt something inside him twist into a cold, razor-sharp ache. He knelt, touched the earth, and understood what had happened. The townspeople had taken her. They had taken the woman he loved. And the world had never seen the eyes of a Cheyenne warrior turn so dark, so fierce, so wounded as they did when Tarek rose to his feet and swore he would bring her back, no matter the cost. Clara walked the endless stretch of prairie like a ghost, learning how to inhabit her own body again. The grass brushed against her skirts in cold, whispering strokes, bending beneath the winter wind that chased her steps as though trying to herd her back to the place that had cast her out. Every mile she traveled felt like a slow unraveling of the life she had known, the girl she had been, the certainty she once carried like a lantern in her chest. By the time the sun dipped behind the distant hills, Clara found a small hollow near a cluster of pines and decided it would have to do. She built a makeshift shelter from fallen branches, pine boughs, and the old blanket the council had allowed her to keep. It wasn't much, just enough to break the wind and keep the worst of the cold off her bones, but it was the only home she had. The first night alone in the wild was the longest night of her life. She didn't sleep, not really. She lay curled beneath the thin blanket, every muscle tight, her senses stretched to the point of pain. The night was alive with sounds, wolves howling somewhere in the distance, the wind screaming as it slipped through the rock crevices, the thin patter of sleet against the pine needles overhead. Each sound felt like it was creeping closer, clawing at her shelter, at her fear, at the hollow ache forming beneath her ribs. But the sound that terrified her most wasn't the wolves or the storm. It was the echo of being abandoned, again, because it wasn't the first time she'd felt cast aside. Clara had grown up in a house where silence was louder than thunder. Her father's voice was steel, his rules colder than the winters that swept through Willow Creek. There were no soft words, no gentle hands, no warmth, just discipline, expectation, a kind of love that felt more like a cage than comfort. So when Tarek entered her life, he became the first warmth she had ever known. She remembered that final night with him as clearly as if the memory were carved into her bones. They had met beneath the old oak, moonlight spilling through its branches like silver ribbons. Tarek had taken her hand, carefully, reverently, as though holding something sacred. Then he had rested his forehead against hers, breath warm, voice low and earnest. "If the wind ever carries you far from here," he whispered, "I will find you." She had laughed, brushing her fingers against his cheek. She told him she would never leave Willow Creek, that she belonged to this valley. He'd shaken his head gently, as though he knew something she didn't. And now she clung to that memory like a burning coal against the cold inside her. She prayed he meant it. She prayed the wind would guide him. She prayed she wasn't completely alone. As days turned to a week, Clara learned to survive in the wilderness, not through skill, but through sheer stubbornness. She scavenged fallen berries, melted snow for water, and wrapped herself in extra pine branches when the nights dipped below freezing. Her fingers cracked from the cold, her stomach ached from hunger, and her heart felt like a wounded bird trapped beneath her ribs, beating frantically but unable to fly. Back in Willow Creek, the story twisted into something unrecognizable. Rumors spread that she had run away with a Cheyenne warrior, that she had chosen disgrace, that she had betrayed her own people. It was easier for the town to say she left willingly than to confront the truth, that they had exiled a young woman into winter because she dared to love someone who didn't look like them. But Tarek refused to let their lies become her fate. When he returned to the meadow and discovered Clara was gone, something in him shattered. He didn't shout or curse or plead. He simply closed his eyes, pressed a hand to the earth where her footprints ended, and breathed through the ache until it sharpened into resolve. He rode home to his village, not to hide, but to seek permission for something that carried both honor and immense weight. Kupane, a sacred offering, a proof that the heart remained true, a gift so valuable that it declared a person's devotion before both tribe and sky. No one knew what words Tarek spoke when he stood before the elders. He stood tall and silent, his breath steady, his eyes shadowed by a determination that made even the oldest warriors pause. The council fire crackled, throwing sparks into the night as he spoke quietly, his voice low but unyielding. Some said he pledged to bring Clara back no matter the cost. Others asked for strength and blessing to face the journey ahead. A few whispered he vowed to return not with weapons, but with something that would force Willow Creek to confront their own cruelty. But at dawn, all anyone truly knew was that Tarek emerged from the council circle with fire in his gaze. He prepared his horse with deliberate, ritualistic care. He strapped his bow and quiver to the saddle, slid a hunting blade into the sheath at his waist, and packed only 4 small doeskin bags, water, herbs, dried meat, and a final pouch whose contents remained a mystery even to those who loved him most. Before he mounted, the tribe's oldest woman approached him. She rested a wrinkled hand over his heart. "Love is not weakness," she murmured, "but the journey to defend it will test every bone inside you." Tarek bowed his head in respect. "I know," he said softly. Then he rode out, alone, toward the wild winter world that had swallowed Clara whole. He did not bring warriors, he did not bring protection, he brought only resolve, and a promise carved into his soul. He would find her. He would restore the honor the white town had stolen. He would bring her home, if not to Willow Creek, then to a place where love did not need permission. The prairie wind howled around him, but he did not flinch. For somewhere beyond the hills, beneath a makeshift shelter of pine branches, a girl shivered in the cold, believing she had been forgotten. And Tarek knew that every second he wasted was another second she faced the winter alone. So he spurred his horse forward, heart burning brighter than the rising sun. The journey to reclaim her had begun. The world stretched wide and merciless before Tarek as he rode into the wild. Mountains rising like old gods to the west, deserts shimmering with heat to the south, endless plains rolling like an ocean of yellow to the north. He crossed them all, not with the desperation of a man chasing vengeance, but with the steady, bone-deep resolve of someone who knew exactly what he was riding toward. He wasn't hunting enemies. He wasn't seeking gold or glory. He sought horses. Not one, not 10, but 100, the sacred number, the impossible number. Among the Cheyenne, horses were not property, but spirits, wind made flesh. To gift them was to give the world itself, and to bring 100 was to declare before heaven and earth that a woman's honor was untouched, her heart worthy, her spirit unbroken. It was the greatest offering a warrior could bring, and Tarek intended to bring it for Clara. The first horses, the desert wind. His journey began in the cracked red canyons of the south. He traded the first of his doeskin bags to an old trader who lived in a tent patched with 50 different fabrics. The man looked Tarek over, nodding with a knowing smile. "You ride far," he said, "far enough to lose yourself." "I ride to find someone," Tarek replied. A trader laughed softly. "Same thing sometimes." The man handed over 2 wild mustangs, lean, fierce beasts with fire in their eyes. "These ones do not bow easily," he warned. "They do not need to," Tarek said. "They only need to run." And so the first 2 horses joined him, nervous, restless, but following the quiet promise in Tarek's steady movements. The second herd, the northern grasslands. From the desert he rode north, where the wind cut cold and sharp across the wide prairie. There he worked for a rancher whose cattle stretched farther than the horizon. Tarek mended fences, broke ice for watering troughs, and rode night watches until his muscles throbbed with exhaustion. He never complained. At the end of 2 weeks, as the rancher stood beside a corral of fine chestnut mares, he said, "No white man in this county works as hard as you." Tarek simply bowed his head. "You've earned more than coin," the rancher continued. "Take 3. The ones with the strong hindquarters. They'll carry you far." 7 horses now followed him. 93 more to go. The battle for the river herd. In the foothills near the Snake River, Tarek hunted buffalo to trade for livestock. For 3 days he tracked a herd through freezing rain, bow drawn, boots sinking deep into the mud. When he finally brought down a massive bull, he used every part of it, meat, hide, bones, nothing wasted. But he wasn't alone on the river. A group of plain bandits, ragged men with hard eyes, caught sight of him leading 4 newly traded ponies across the shallows. One of them spat. "Look what we got here, a quiet little horse thief." Tarek said nothing. Words were meaningless to men who had already decided what they wanted. When they drew their guns, he moved with the speed of lightning slicing through cloud. His bow sang once, twice, 3 times. When it was over, the river carried the bandits' guns downstream. Tarek gathered the trembling horses, whispered to them softly in Cheyenne, and stroked their wet manes until they stilled. 11 horses now. He still needed 89. Storms, scarcity, and the edge of death. Weeks passed. Snowstorms swallowed the plains. Sandstorms caught his breath in the desert. He slept under ledges, inside hollow trees, and sometimes not at all. There were nights his fire nearly died, and nights when he nearly froze beside it. Food scarce, water scarcer. Once he collapsed in the shadow of a towering boulder, vision blurring. "Clara," he whispered. The name kept him awake, kept him riding, kept him breathing. Every morning he rose with frost on his eyelashes, packed the few belongings he hadn't yet traded, and continued his impossible mission. The miracle of the Red Valley. In a valley painted in red earth and sharp cliffs, Tarek came upon a wild herd, over 100 head strong. Their hooves thundered like drums, shaking the ground beneath him. To claim even one would take skill. To claim many would require faith. He pursued them for 3 days through brush and stone, guiding them not with force, but with patience, driving them gently toward a narrow pass where he could separate the younger stallions. When the moment came, he rode with a fierceness that set the wind aflame around him. By dusk, he had gathered 23 more horses, 34 in total, still far from 100. Nights beneath the same sky. Every night, after securing the herd, Tarek built a small fire and sat with his hands open toward the sky. Stars blinked down at him like the watching eyes of ancestors. "Clara," he murmured, his voice carried into the darkness like a vow carved in stone. And miles away, beneath the thin roof of her pine branch shelter, Clara lay awake, staring at those same stars through the gaps in the boughs. She didn't know if Tarek was alive, didn't know if he still searched, didn't know if the cold world had taken her from him. But she whispered back into the night, "I'm still here." The wind caught her words, pulling them upward toward the same sky he prayed beneath. 2 hearts, 2 worlds, 1 promise held between them like a lifeline. The last stretch of the impossible. Tarek pushed onward, north to the mountains, west to the deep pine forests, then south again to the plains. His herd grew slowly. 1 horse from a hunter he helped track a wounded elk, 2 from a frontier widow he protected from trespassers, 3 from a tribe who respected his courage, 5 from a group of wild stallions he tamed with nothing but rope, instinct, and patience. Months passed, winter deepened, and one evening, as the sun bled red across the sky, Tarek stood on a ridge overlooking a valley filled with the shapes of horses, his horses, moving like rivers of muscle and grace. He counted them with quiet breath. 96, 97, 98, 99. 1 more. 1 more to complete the vow. 1 more to bring her honor home. 1 more to prove that love was stronger than exile. Tarek closed his eyes, hand pressed to his heart. "For you, Clara," he whispered into the firelit wind. And somewhere beyond the distant hills, a girl exiled and alone felt her heart stir without knowing why.
That spring morning, Willow Creek awoke to a thunder no one could have predicted. The ground trembled first, then came the pounding hoofbeats, a wave of sound rolling across the prairie like an approaching storm. Windows rattled, shutters clattered, people stumbled out into the dirt street, hearts pounding, eyes wide with fear. Some grabbed rifles, others clutched children close. Whispers of raid, massacre, war spread faster than the wind. They said they saw shapes in the haze, dark forms riding fast, faces hidden under wide-brimmed hats, horses pouring over the hills like a living tide bearing doom. But then the crowd saw the front rider alone, his figure steady atop a fine gray stallion, dust rising from each hoof-rise, mane whipping in the mid-morning wind. Behind him, stretching farther than the eye could reach, were 100 horses, not wild and panic-stricken, but calm, regal, linking hoofprint after hoofprint like a river of sentient muscle and spirit. No riders, no weapons visible, only horses, proud, silent, alive. Everything froze. Children stopped screaming, dogs ceased barking, dust hung still in the air as the procession advanced. The first man to fall silent was the butcher, wide-shouldered, apron still splattered from the previous evening's work. Then the blacksmith, hammer halfway raised, metal glowing red in his hand. Then the preacher, his Bible clutched too tightly to sink to his side. All of them watched, jaws slack, faces paling under the rising sun. At the front of the herd, the rider reined in his stallion, stirring a cloud of dust that glinted gold in the daylight. He cast his gaze down the dusty road until it found the empty house where Clara's family once lived. the house where she had grown up, pure, obedient, untouchable. Now the windows were shuttered, the gate rusted shut, the fence sagged under winter's weight. The rider lifted a hand and placed it over his heart. His voice came then, soft but steady, clear enough to carry across the hush. I came for her honor. No guns fired, no mob surged forward, no wagon rolled to block his path. They had never heard a declaration like that. Silence, heavy, immovable. He waited. The horses shifted behind him, stamping soft echoes. Their warm breath steamed in the morning air. There was something sacred in that moment, as though the wind and earth themselves leaned in to listen. Then a door creaked open. Old man Whitmore stepped onto his porch, walking slowly, cane tapping on rough wood. His eyes narrowed. The townsfolk behind him parted uncertainly, their faces drawn and pale. Some lowered guns, some tucked fists into pockets. "Boy," he said finally, voice dry like broken leather. "What's this?" Tarek shifted in the saddle, his posture calm, his expression grave. "I bring back what was taken unjustly," he answered. Whitmore spat to the ground. "This is my town, my property, my daughter's shame." The rider nodded faintly. But shame wore no colors under Cheyenne sky. Only honor endures. A murmur rippled through the gathered crowd, shock, confusion, indignation. A blacksmith spat curse under his breath. A wife clutched her daughter closer. A few men tightened fingers on rifle stocks. Then Tarek raised a hand, not threatening, gentle, like a blessing. "Look at the horses. 100 necks bowed to nothing but truth. Each hoofprint is a vow." He dropped his gaze to the dust at his horse's feet. "If she was disgraced, let these beasts bury that lie under lands that know no prejudice." He lifted his eyes slowly, letting them meet those of the townsfolk. "She is not disgrace. She is redemption." For a long minute, nothing stirred. Then the wind picked up again, rattling the shuttered windows, as though the town itself shivered on the brink of decision. Finally, a single voice cracked, old Widow Harris, standing at her door near the far side of town. "Is this for real, mister?" she asked, voice trembling. Tarek nodded. "As real as dawn." She exhaled, her breath shaky, and whispered, "Then I beg your pardon, Clara." One by one, more doors creaked open. People stepped out, faces softened or lowered ashamed. Children peeped, horses whinnied softly, stamping in the dusty street. No one moved forward, no one called him outlaw, savage, intruder. Instead, they stood, silent, shocked, impressed. In that rare moment, fear and anger dissolved under something heavier, awe. As the crowd parted slowly, Tarek guided his gray stallion forward. The other horses followed obediently, their tails sweeping dust like silent brushes. He reached the front gate of the Whitmore residence. The gate hung open, the hinges groaned. No guard stood. Clara wasn't there. She had left long ago. The house was empty, the garden overgrown. The porch sagged, the windows stared blank and cold like empty eyes. But Tarek spoke again, not to the house, but to the sky. "She may not be here yet," he said softly, "but honor lives until the one who wronged it returns to claim it." The truth echoed louder than any gunshot. A few among the crowd looked away. Others wept quietly. The blacksmith sheathed his hammer. The butcher dropped his knife. The preacher looked down at his Bible, lips moving silently in prayer. And then, slowly, carefully, the townsfolk parted the way for the 100 horses to pass. Under the mountain sun, a strange parade wheeled down the dusty street and out toward the open prairie once more, not as raiders or doombringers, but as a living testament that love can reclaim honor, that justice can ride lightly but with steadfast resolve, that sometimes the purest of gifts is not steel or gold, but the wild spirit of 80 hoofbeats pounding earth in promise. Tarek looked back once to the silent windows of the town, then forward to the horizon where wind-bent grasses whispered against a sky washed pale and new. He did not shout. He did not gloat. He simply rode, because with him rode the truth, because with him rode hope, because with him rode love, and love, like the wind, cannot be chained. Clara heard the horses before she saw them. The sound came first, a deep rolling thunder crawling across the prairie, shaking the small clay cup in her hand, stirring the dust around her ankles. She froze. Her breath hitched. The world narrowed. And then she ran, out of the small hide and timber shelter where she'd been living these past lonely months, past the dying fire, past the drying herbs hanging from the beams. Her boots hammered against the ground as she climbed the small ridge behind her camp. And when she reached the top, the morning sun struck her eyes like a revelation. Horses, 100 of them. Their coats shimmered in the new light like waves of silver and copper rolling across the earth. Their manes flew wild in the wind, and their hoofbeats drummed the ground like the heartbeat of the plains themselves. They moved in formation, purposeful, steady, not wild, but guided, led by him. Tarek rode at the front, the wind tearing through his dark hair, the sun carving his silhouette in gold. There was dust on his shoulders and exhaustion in the way he leaned forward, yet nothing in the world looked stronger, nobler, or more certain than the man returning to her. Clara's vision blurred. "Tarek," she whispered, the name breaking in her throat. He saw her. Even from that distance she knew, she felt it, like a pull between two souls that had never stopped reaching. He swung down from the stallion before it even fully halted, and she ran, down the ridge, across the thinning grass, through the dust kicked up by the approaching herd. They collided in the middle of the plain as if the past months had been only a single breath between them. His hands cupped her face, her fingers clutched his coat. His forehead rested against hers as if he needed to feel her skin to believe she existed. She trembled. He exhaled like a man who had crossed continents to reach a single moment of peace. "Clara," he breathed, the word cracking open something deep in him. "I came with everything I have." She pressed her face against his chest, feeling his heartbeat slam into hers. "And I waited with nothing," she whispered, voice breaking, "but hope." He kissed her hair, her temple, the corner of her eye where tears clung, and around them 100 horses circled slowly, quiet and reverent, like guardians of a love that refused to die. When they returned to Willow Creek, the earth fell silent beneath the approaching hooves. People stepped out of homes. Men froze with tools in their hands. Women pressed hands over their mouths. Children peeked from behind skirts. Fear flickered first, then disbelief, then something heavier, something uncomfortable, shame. For no one could deny what the procession meant. 100 horses, a gift greater than gold, a gesture that carried courage, loyalty, sacrifice, and a love fierce enough to challenge the entire town. Tarek dismounted, helping Clara down with a tenderness that made the onlookers shift uneasily. He faced the council, the same men who had cast her out, heads high and hearts hard. Now their faces were pale, strained, cracked by the weight of their own judgment. Tarek's voice rose, steady and unshaking, like wind carving its truth into stone. "She is not a shame," he said. "She is my heart, and this," he swept his arm toward the sea of horses, "is the proof." No one spoke. No one could speak. The truth stood too tall. The evidence thundered too loud. Their laws, their fears, their pride, all of it suddenly looked small next to a love that had crossed exile, winter, hunger, and miles of unforgiving land. The butcher looked down at his boots. The sheriff cleared his throat and found no words. Even the blacksmith, who once called Clara a disgrace, lowered his eyes like a man staring at the reflection of his own ugliness. Finally, as dust settled around them, an old figure stepped through the crowd. The minister. His hands shook against his cane. His voice trembled with years and regret. "Child," he swallowed, blinking back tears, "you may come home." Clara looked at the faces before her, the same faces that had turned away when she needed them most. She felt no anger now, only release, the kind that comes when a wound has bled long enough to finally close. She turned to Tarek, fingers seeking his. He laced their hands together, grounding her with the warmth of his touch. "Home," she said softly, but loud enough that Willow Creek heard every syllable. "My home is wherever he stands." A ripple went through the crowd, part awe, part shame, part something like awakening. But Clara no longer needed their approval, and Tarek never had. Together they stepped back toward the open plain. No one stopped them. No one dared. They mounted the gray stallion and rode out of Willow Creek, not as outcasts, but as legends the town would whisper about for generations. Behind them, 100 horses surged forward, kicking up a golden cloud in the sinking sun, their hooves singing a hymn older than any written prayer. A hymn of loyalty, of courage, of love that refused to be broken by fear. As the last rays of daylight stretched across the prairie, Clara leaned into Tarek's back, her cheek pressed to the steady rhythm of his breath. He reached back, sliding his fingers into hers. The wind gathered around them, warm and wild, carrying away the final echoes of a town that had once called their love forbidden. Ahead of them, the horizon opened wide, endless, welcoming, untamed. Their new beginning, their true home. And long after their shadows vanished into the twilight, the people of Willow Creek still stood in stunned silence, listening to the fading thunder of hopes. They would say for many years after, love once left this town in chains.
but it returned with the wind and with 100 horses.